Amen. Amen. Whoa. Josh, thank you. Thank you. I don't know how your quote jumped on my screen, but somehow it just jumped up there. I love that. Because I think we so many times, it's like we try to be somebody we're not, or we try to be somewhere we're not. We try to live, in our mind somewhere in the future or drug back in the past. And we are where we are. And that's the only place God is, which is, in now. It might sound kind of strange to people, this idea that, God isn't in the future and God isn't in the past. But when you stop and think about that for a while, this is where God is in the present. His present is ever present. So boy, you get into time conversations about God and it can really boggle your brain. But I love that. Instead of, wishing we were together or, at Wild Horse Camp out at Big Lake, or something, we're here. We're here. And no matter where we are the body of Christ. I love it. Thanks. As I said earlier, Josh, I want to spend more time with you, buddy. Thank you for that. This is my first time to meet you. And I'm going to go looking you up on YouTube because I like singing with you. And I'm going to sing with you some more. And I like, too, that, you make me sound good. So, hey, it's really been, had no idea as we started this idea of exploring, respect, empathy, and inclusion, a virtual Bible camp. What is that going to look like, And that first night, Pastor Les had on this kind of really bright plaid camp style shirt, and I'm like, oh man, he's there. I still had on just. But as the time together has gone on, and as I've been spending time too with the team in Oregon who's been putting this together, I can't thank you enough. You guys are like super affirming, and I'm just, my heart's overflowing this morning, and I'm super, super grateful. As I look around too, I'm kind of glad that YouTube fell aside here and we got this Zoom so I can look into all of your different faces. I'll confess right now, I've got you on gallery view. Okay, some of you don't have your cameras on, but that's okay. We're not going to judge. We're not going to judge. It's nice just to see your names. But if you do want to turn your camera on, that's cool too. I know other people might put it on gallery view and maybe they'll get distracted in church, but shoot, that's what happens. People look around church and, people look around Zoom, but I'm happy to see your faces. I really appreciate this opportunity and to share stories. I can't tell you how many church services. Okay, let's not say it that way. Let's say it this way. The services that I loved the most were when people told stories. And so that's what I've really, and I mean, that's what Jesus, that's how he rolls. It's all about a story. This guy with his sheep and this woman with her coins and this guy with the two sons, it's always about stories. And so this morning, I'm really excited about the story that we're getting into because we're going to be looking at this story from several angles. But before we do that, our theme has been, and I'm glad that's connected with you too, Melissa, this idea, and this is a quote, this is not my quote, this is from Bell Hooks. The choice to love is a choice to connect. And then she doesn't just stop there because that would be powerful in itself. Because so many times we're like, oh yeah, we gotta love. No, we gotta connect. But then she takes us that step farther to find ourselves in the other. And boy, we with this whole idea of finding the good, and last night's story, looking at grace, and talk about a choice to love is a choice to connect. Grace, it just blows our mind with 13-year-old Grace rescuing this little baby. I grabbed the picture just to show some of you, because I know some of you have been to Africa and things like that. But remember, she said that baby, and this is just some women in Africa, not Grace's story, okay? But that baby that she rescued, she wrapped in the cloth. You see how the babies are, and this is beautiful. So the women in Rwanda have these beautiful dresses, and sometimes the wraparound is different from the dress that they're wearing that's holding their baby on. And sometimes the wraparound, like this lady's, is the same material. But we heard in the story last night how Grace took the bloody cloth from the mother who was dying and wrapped Vanessa. I just think about being, wrapped in the arms of God. I think about Christ's robe of righteousness. I think about a ton of stuff. And I am going to find a way to share this video with you, because I know some of you would like to share it with others. And it used to be on YouTube, but it's not anymore. So I'm gonna post it. I need to just talk to the folks in Rwanda a little bit, because some of you had great questions about them too. And I'll talk to some of my friends in Rwanda to get more of the story. One of you was asking, how did Grace do it? A 13-year-old raising a baby in post-genocide society. And so I look forward to learning more about that story. But I was so moved by just Grace constantly, not just rescuing that baby and risking her life, but she kept doing the next right thing, that next right thing. And this idea that Grace wasn't in the center, she put Vanessa in the center. This idea of stepping out of the center and putting the other. If I'm going to connect, okay, this is probably a bad analogy, but it came in my head. And sometimes I should check things a little more filter, but I'm going unfiltered right now, huh? You ever heard about going on a date with a guy and all he talks about is himself? Okay, that's connection. No. This idea of getting out of the center. So I want to share with you first in our story, we are going to talk about Maria and Filbert. Some of you have heard about them before, and we lightly referenced them the first evening. But I was in Rwanda this last summer, 2019, not this 2020 COVID summer, we were all home, 2019, with these kids from Chicago. I'm super excited right now because I got some clips that you'll hear their voices. As they were coming, they had been studying peace building in Chicago. Many of these young people coming from really tough neighborhoods in Chicago. In fact, I remember asking, are you worried about gun violence at your school? And one of the kids laughed and said, no, school's safe. It's getting to school where we have to worry about the gun violence. And another one of the kids, he was like, our bus driver was just so gracious and lovely. And he's like, boy, bus drivers aren't like this in Chicago. Now, I don't want to diss on Chicago bus drivers. All I'm saying is that these guys were falling in love with Rwanda, which is really easy to do. In fact, I'm gonna.
Everything to me, dancing is how I found my self-confidence. Dancing is how I'm growing into the woman I am today. I mean, before I started dancing, I didn't really know who I was. Like, I was just here, but who is Micah? I didn't really know.
It was a very interesting way to see these people that don't speak the same language.
Okay, Amen here, a Rwandan young lady who was helping us host the group because the kids wanted to do homestays. We didn't stay in homes the whole 2 weeks, but for, I think, 2 nights, they stayed at homes. And Amen, this young Rwandan lady who was helping us host and arrange the homestays, she was just so blown away with how people communicated when she would leave them at places where nobody spoke English, and they still listened to her. Their communication.
Sometimes I would leave my auntie with them. They could communicate. I don't know how, but they did. And I'm glad that you can see that when there's intentionality in whatever you're doing, that love goes beyond boundaries of like language, of culture, and that people can actually understand each other even when they don't understand each other.
I really love the homestay. I call her Mama Benny. She treated me like I was her own child.
No one at home wanted them to go. My auntie would be like, tell them I don't want them to go. I want them to stay forever. And she told it to me like 3 times. And I was like, I'm not going to repeat the same word so many times. I think they actually heard what you said. My dad was calling them his daughters. Guess now my dad has more kids and the love is being divided into so many pieces. I don't know where we are.
As you can just get a little flavor from that experience, these kids from Chicago, just their hearts are bound together with new Rwandan friends. And a couple of clips that I want to share with you today are their experience in Rwanda, going to the place where we met Maria and Filbert. going and meeting with what are called peace champions, young people in Rwanda who have done training in peace and peace building, and then they've done different projects. You're going to meet a couple of those young people, and you're going to see the interaction between these Chicago students and these Rwandan peace champions. And I'm excited to share these stories with you. And then we're going to dig deeper into it after we see a few of these clips. In fact, we'll pause and talk about it along the way. But the first clip that the next one that I'll share with you, we will be arriving at the community center where Maria and Philbert and many other people, some survivors and some perpetrators. It's interesting, when Maria introduces you to Philbert, she doesn't introduce you to him. Okay, I've told this story multiple times, and sometimes I tell myself, slow down a minute, Carl, let this sink in. She doesn't introduce Philbert as the guy who killed her husband and sons. She introduces Philbert as an incredibly valuable family friend, as a man harvest time can count on him, as a man who showed her where her husband and son's graves were. You see, we might wonder sometimes if, he was in prison. And okay, I'm going to get deeper in the story a little later, but let me just finish this part here. I got these voices in my head. I need to just listen to one here. We're going to dig into it, but just this part right here. Maria says, Philbert helped me in my journey of getting free from anger and bitterness. And when I first heard that, I'm sorry, my initial reaction was, no. I don't want you to attribute anything positive to this man. When she would say, he helps me like my sons would have, you know what my first thought was? If you wouldn't have killed him, you would have had your sons. I'm not proud of that, huh? That's just the thoughts that were firing in my brain until I spent more time with Maria and I started to see Philbert through her eyes. I started to fire some pathways of compassion and empathy as modeled by Maria. So we're gonna come into this story, and you'll hear our Chicago kids. Let me just play the first clip.
On the afternoon of our fourth day in Rwanda, we visited Gweru, one of 6 reconciliation villages where genocide survivors and perpetrators live alongside one another. It was there that we met Maria, a 61-year-old survivor, and Philbert, a 44-year-old man, plus a 19-year-old killed Maria's husband and 3 of her children.
At the reconciliation village, I had a lot of conflicting feelings. Like, I didn't know whether to feel angry and like mad, but then I didn't know whether to feel like at peace with myself and like at peace with them. But at the same time, I wanted to feel like, okay, let me just be here in the moment and really understand their testimonies from both the victim and the perpetrator. Sometimes it's best to just be there and just to hear.
I love that part where she's wrestling with this. This is super uncomfortable. Even to be in the same room, I could have paused at one point where you would have seen a lady with her arm around a man. They're both sharing a wooden chair because there weren't enough chairs to go around. And she's a survivor, and he had killed people. And today, 26 years later, they're sitting on the same wooden chair. We were there a month later with a group. It's called Big Lunch. If you ever want to Google that in YouTube, a really neat program that's going on community building. Sorry, not in YouTube, in the UK. Sorry, UK. Big Lunch. You can check it out. But this lady, she had just gotten off the plane and she was blown away. She'd seen these people in the same room because for many of us, the only pathways we fired are genocide pathways. They're pathways of murder and betrayal. But for years in Rwanda, they've been firing new pathways. And this lady from the UK noticed another woman in the group who she knew had already been identified as a survivor. She noticed her reach over and fix one of the perpetrator's shirt collars was up. And a guy who'd been released from prison, And she saw this Rwandan woman reach over and straighten his collar. And she says, that's not fake. That's not put on. Nobody's, they're not just doing a show for the foreigners who are here. I love the way that this idea of suspending judgment, what she was just, wait a minute, who was that? Was that, anyway, the Chicago girl, sorry, I got a lot of things flowing through my head here, was saying, I didn't know what to do, to be angry, to be at peace with them. But in the end, she suspended judgment. She went for the deeper why and curiosity. And that ability to suspend judgment and replace it with curiosity is, for me, foundational in this journey. Listen, that's what she said we got to do.
Living life the best way you can and just appreciating life for what it is. Forgiveness plays a role in that, because once you forgive somebody, you're like basically starting your route to healing yourself. And once you heal, then you can appreciate life a lot more and not walk around with hatred in your heart for somebody else. You can appreciate life. And
it's as if the blinders have been taken off, and I am no longer, multiple times a day firing pathways of anger and bitterness in my head. And while I'm firing those pathways of anger and bitterness, I'm missing life going on around me. Love that thought. Check this one out.
One of the peace champions grew up without a father, and I grew up kind of without a mother. And it was like, okay, I was thinking that when I came here and when I met them, that we'll have totally different experiences and we'll be going through totally different things. And so it was like, it took a lump out of my chest to find someone who connected with me. Carl told me recently that forgiveness means no longer looking down on that situation or the person. And it kind of really stuck with me based off my personal experiences with my mother. I spent countless years disliking her, countless years blaming myself for the reason of her not being in my life. And so when I heard that forgiveness is not linear, and when I heard that forgiveness means you're healing and you're no longer looking down on that person, it was touching for me, because it was the idea that once I can forgive her, I can move on. Once I can forgive her, then I can feel better about myself.
Rhea took 10 years to forgive Filbert, and I think a lot of it is just time, and she saw effort that Filbert put in, to just say hi to her. Even if Maria wouldn't say hi back, he would go out of his way to say hi to her. And I think for me to forgive someone, I would need to see effort be put in by the perpetrators to want forgiveness.
We had just a ton of wonderful, in the evening we get back to our guest house and we just be unpacking the day, and I'd be learning from these kids. When Ronisha said that I told her forgiveness is no longer looking down on people, I kind of hung my head in shame, because I said, you might know that in your head, Carl, but you're not there yet. With some people, you are still looking down on them. And this whole time together, as we were wrestling with these issues, how do you live after something like this? How do you love people? A choice to love is a choice to connect. And the connection, seeing yourself and the other. And Ronisha, you'll see her again, one of the, Emmanuel, who I adored, Emmanuel, he was talking about the homestay. Mama Benny, he says, I call her Mama Benny. He just loved her food. I had never spent 2 weeks with young people so intimately from inner cities as I got to do in Rwanda. One more clip, I think, here's what we've got.
The one thing that's going to stick with me going back to East Garfield Park is the conversation I had with the peace champion. He told me about his father and how he didn't want to let his father's actions determine his future.
Kids who are born after genocide, having to deal with our past, our history, most of them carry a trauma that they inherited from their parents. So it's a big challenge having to deal with something you didn't cause yourself.
I would almost like to just have taken just one clip and spent our whole morning on one clip because there's so much packed inside each one of these. You know, when she's talking about kids having to deal with trauma that they didn't cause, but it was handed down to them by their parents. And you know, I used to wonder about, in the Bible, it would talk about the sins of the parents, the fathers, going down to the third and fourth generation. But as Emmanuel was talking to one of the peace champions there, and he realized, I don't have to be defined by my past. I don't. That's such a powerful realization and an awakening. Yujita, I haven't introduced, who's spoken here a couple of times. She works at the Kigali Genocide Memorial, and really, congratulations to her. She just had a little one a couple months ago. But Yujita, we had so much wisdom in terms of this journey of healing afterwards. So I'll let her continue, and the rest of this clip play here.
And even finding yourself being traumatized to things you didn't even see, because it does not make sense.
Back at home in Chicago, like all the trauma that we go through, kids and teenagers, we become like desensitized to it, which is not good. It really makes you think about some of the choices that you make, if I'm doing enough, if I'm doing the right things.
Los jóvenes tienen un voz, y creo que cuando los jóvenes tienen un voz, entonces sí se puede hacer un cambio. Y creo que aquí en Rwanda sí hubo muchos cambios.
The one thing is,
Cristo, I don't know if you could read the subtitles and if you don't speak Spanish, but he says, I found out that when youth have their voice, change happens. And in Rwanda, change is happening. Oh man, Cristo would hardly, he's a quiet guy, but when he spoke, it was profound.
Young kids, young people are the hope of a country that is destroyed like Rwanda was. It's up to us to choose what to do and to choose better so that history will not repeat itself.
When we were at the Gashora all-girls school, a girl next to me, Joanna, she said something that really resonated with me. I'm going to live my truth. She's not going to live by anyone else's truth. She's not going to do something out of convenience. She's not going to live by something that she doesn't believe in so that she can fit in. She's going to do what she believes is right.
Never forget that every one of us has something to offer. It may, in your estimate, look little, but you don't know the value it is bringing to the community around you. It's in those tiny little things that would build over time that make peace.
Enoch, you know, with his speech challenges, Enoch has rose above so much. And if you couldn't quite hear him and read the subtitles, Enoch was talking about the tiny things. It's the little things, he says, that build peace. And for a young man who no doubt, you know, was harassed and bullied because of his speech challenges and stuff, Enoch really recognizes the power of little kindnesses. Enoch has gone on to write a book. I was scrambling this morning and I couldn't find it on my bookshelf. I wanted to hold it up for you. So hopefully I'll share that for you a little bit later. But I hope you've gotten a bit of the flavor of the experience that we all had, the Chicago kids and myself, in Rwanda last summer. And oh yeah, there were just so many good morsels and tidbits in there. This is actually the first time I've taken an 18-minute video and pull pieces out like that to share with you guys. And I'm super excited to share these pieces with many more students or whoever will listen. So where I would love to pick up with you, and then we want to move into some conversation, is just a little more unpacking of Maria and Philbert's story. I mean, this is like one of my favorite pictures is Patricia. You know, she's flown all the way around the world. And if she just flew around the world to hug Maria, she would tell you it was enough. It was worth it to hug Maria. Maria's Maria's story is a tough one. Maria and I actually are about the same age. She's just a year younger than me. And at the time of the genocide, some of you heard Thursday night how Teresa and I had to make a decision about basically our kids' safety, number one, was that, but then also our larger family, the young lady who lived and worked in our home. And we had to, the young man who was there in the evening as the watchman. And Teresa and I made the decision to separate. She would take the children and I would stay with Anita and Janvier. It was interesting as I listened to Maria tell her story, as she and her husband had a similar discussion, only they knew all of them were at risk of dying. And they thought, and this wasn't unusual. It happened often in Rwanda. Parents would split up. She took her daughter and he took the two sons, hoping that perhaps as a smaller group, they would be able to survive. It's interesting, isn't it? That first night we talked about the Belgian television lady. She said, I couldn't say we can't help you. I wasn't talking to a group of 100. I was talking to one person, one-on-one. And it's just this morning coming to me too, that perhaps if there were 3 people that were at your mercy to be killed, you might connect more humanely than if there are 5 people or 15 or 20 people at your mercy. It worked for Maria and her daughter. It did not work for her husband and sons. And I've already alluded to some of my struggle with Filbert. In fact, when I asked Maria for a picture, again, I'm not proud at all about this, but it's a journey. I didn't want Filbert in the picture. Somebody must have just said, hey, go get in a picture, Filbert, or something. And I looked past Maria and this guy who told these students, this guy who stayed in Rwanda during the genocide, this guy who people tend to put up on a pedestal and use these words like hero and stuff. I looked past Maria and I didn't want the guy in the picture. I was thinking, I'm going to love sharing about Maria. But in my heart, I was stuck in 1994. All I could see when I saw this man was a murderer and a rapist. And then the next quick technical thought that comes to my head, fine, I'll just crop him out. And some people kind of laugh when I say that, and it's kind of funny, but it's not funny, especially in the presence of somebody like Maria. This idea that's the same kind of thinking. The same greenhouse where genocide grows is the greenhouse where says, I'm going to crop somebody out. The same habitat that this kind of exclusive problem solving flourishes is the habitat where I think, I can't wait till I don't have to deal with that person anymore. I'm somehow going to eliminate them. A choice to love is a choice to connect. Let me go a little bit deeper here in their story. Maria, she helped me a lot. And sometimes it's little things. And I love Enoch's statement about little things, this road to peace paved with little choices, little acts. She said, maybe you don't understand, Carl, because I was back there a month later. And actually during that month, I had processed a lot and I had recognized my anger. I had recognized my unforgiveness in my heart as I was journaling to God, because, I come home from that first visit just really moved by Maria and really troubled by Filbert. And so I had done a lot of journaling about that. And I had realized, number one, I thought Filbert didn't look sorry. He didn't seem to have a posture that was sorry to me. And I realized the problem, in fact, it was a friend who really helped me. Keel, he works with me in World Outside My Shoes and just one of the many great colleagues out there. And Keel said, from my reading, and he does a lot of reading. Keel's probably, 35. He's a young old guy. With a lot of reading, a lot of philosophers and things. He says, from my reading, and Keel happens to be somebody that's in love with God too. Keel says, from my reading, I found out that in those hard to answer questions, those questions where we think it's really hard to figure out, perhaps the answer is not as important as my posture while I'm looking for it. Do you get that? When we were in this room back there in that community center, and I was sitting in a chair looking at Filbert and judging, he doesn't look, I don't know, maybe I wanted him to look at the floor. I just somehow wanted him to look sorry. It wasn't a problem of Filbert's posture. It was my posture of judgment, my posture of being stuck in 1994, my posture of anger and bitterness that I thought I had dealt with other situations and other stories over the year. But anger and bitterness is so stealthy. It is so subtle, and it weaves and it takes hold inside. And so since, before Filbert, I was actually praying after another encounter with somebody who had been leading a killing squad. They said they were responsible for killing more than 2,000 people. And after wrestling with my encounter with him and working through, seeing him, you remember the 5 things, some of you might, I just kind of went off real quick last night, how God's always with me and God takes great delight in me. God's love calms my heart, and God has everything I need for every situation. God's my redeemer, my shepherd. As I worked through those truths with Gregoire's name, the guy in charge of the killing squad, instead of my name, it was that rehumanizing process. I thought I was breaking free from 94 with Gregoire. And I started praying, God, in my prayer journal and stuff. I was shocked in 2016 when I met this man who I had seen during the Genesis. In fact, some of you, if you watched that film, I'm Not Leaving, on YouTube, that we just stuck there, you'll have seen a story in an orphanage where we were bringing food and water to these kids, Casikwa and I, and the leader of the local killing squad came there with 50 of his guys to kill everybody. That's the guy I'm referring to, Gregoire, that leader of the killing squad, which didn't happen. I won't go into that story right now. But what I'm saying is, I couldn't believe how angry I was when I encountered that man, 2016, 22 years later. And so I started praying, God, reveal other places of anger in my heart, because I didn't even know it was here. And I was praying that prayer and not praying that prayer. As life went on and other things went on, and that's why these hard times can be such a blessing, because they help us identify stuff we didn't know was in there if we give it time, if we take this time with God. And so I came back to Rwanda and I came face to face with Filbert. And when I got home afterwards and was journaling, I'm like, God, I don't know how long I've prayed for you to show me the anger in my heart. And I stopped praying that. And boom, I ran into Filbert and I saw there's still a lot to be done, and he doesn't. He who started the good work, you know the text. He's faithful. But it's our connection with him that work can move forward. So with Marie and Filbert, okay, I'm getting off script here. I'm not near as scripted as I was the last 2 nights, and we're at 11:30. Here's what we'll do for the last few minutes, because I really want to get to some conversation with you here as you're working through this story and things. Let's finish that one where I was, and then we'll move there. Okay, so remember, I'm at the point where I'm like, this guy doesn't look sorry to me. And I started discounting his testimony. I started asking him some very pointed questions, and it got quiet in the room. The first visit, and the Chicago kids, I'm sure they would remember this and stuff. And the Chicago kids could tell in my body language, in my tone, I was not friendly. I was not amicable. I was not gracious towards Filbert. Okay, on the outside, maybe it looked sort of controlled, but most people, especially Rwandans, could read through that facade. So when I went back a month later after working this through with God and stuff, I apologized to Filbert for the way I had treated him. And Filbert very graciously, extended his hand. This is all going on in Kinyarwanda, and I'll share. We'll stick it somewhere. I wrote up the whole story, so there's a lot more details. But what I want to say is Maria came forward, and evidently in the translation, because I wanted to say something to Maria, and she's like, no, wait. And then Yujita, who you met in the video, she's translating, and she says, wait a minute, Carl. Maria wants to say something, and Maria says, I understand if you think Filbert's a little bit proud. Now, I never said Filbert was proud. I said I didn't think he looked sorry. But remember, we're working through languages and cultures, okay? And perhaps even Maria's word wasn't exactly proud, but when it got translated to me in English, it came across like that. But anyway, she says, I understand why you might think Filbert's a little proud. And she looks at him and she says, you know, in prison when they threatened to kill him if he confessed, he was very courageous and he confessed anyway, because other perpetrators said, no, your confession will implicate us. And she says, you know, he went after the other people, the other 8 men who killed my husband and sons, and he wouldn't stop until they confessed. He still went after them and wouldn't stop until they came to me and apologized. She looks at him with this really genuinely warm smile and she says, I think he's proud of that, she said. And she puts her hand on his shoulder and she says, it's wonderful to be part of making somebody beautiful again. And I'm just awash with all of this grace and kindness and mercy. And I might, you know, put on our logo, respect, empathy, and inclusion. But right now I'm seeing it in living color with Maria and Filbert. So where I want to, and we'll like 2 minutes here. I just wanted to, no, I'm not going to do that. We got to go to Q&A time. And if during our Q&A time, you want to explore a little bit more of Maria and Filbert's story, some of the logistics, there's a really important concept that I'm just going to briefly, and I usually wrap it in a story, so I'm going against my own rules here, but this idea of having shared experiences. When we have a shared experience, it can change the way we think and feel about ourselves and about the other and about life in general, our situation. Shared experiences are, well, okay, this is the quick version. Maria and Filbert were making bricks together to build homes. Initially, they weren't happy to see each other at all. They were both very uncomfortable, awkward, and everything else. So this is not a beautiful story from day one. This is a story of incredibly hard work. This is a story of incredible courage and resilience. And again, Maria said that her daughter took quite a while longer than her to be able to even kind of be around Filbert. But she went from that slamming the door in his face at times when he came by to inviting him to her wedding and asking him to be the master of ceremonies at her wedding. That just, I know you're just hearing this in a couple of minutes. That just knocked me over. And I was like, are you kidding, Maria? You must, that must have made people angry in your family, any family that survived that she had, that must have made them angry. Maybe some didn't want to come to the wedding because Filbert was going to be there and stuff. And she says to me, yeah, my family was angry. But she says, Filbert's family was angry when he asked my daughter to be the godmother to his children. And I'm like, oh, this is so Maria. This is so classic Maria. I put her in the center of the circle and I say, weren't your family angry? And Maria's like, yeah, but then she deftly steps out of the circle and puts Filbert in the circle and says, but his family was angry too when he asked, my daughter to be the godmother to his children. So this idea of shared experiences, I'm not even going into the mud brick one. We'll just dig out that later. But back to you, Melissa, Les. How many minutes are we going to take here this morning to for a little bit of conversation?
We're going to play it by ear based on the questions that we have coming through the chat. And we have some great leaders from Milo who are jumping on that are going to bring some questions to you as well, Carl.
All right, good.
Go ahead, Caleb.
Hey, Caleb, I need to give you fair warning. I always I get to ask the first question, which is, what do you love doing? I mean, you got free time, I don't know, vacation. What do you love doing, Caleb?
I like to hang out with people.
Oh yeah, loving it too. Just like today, we're hanging out. What do you want to explore, Caleb?
So one of the questions was, or from someone that I know, was, what is the line between giving mercy or not giving the discipline needed to quit the bad behavior?
Yeah, yeah. I love it. I love it. A squiggly line, you know, not a straight line, not the same line. This is the way Jesus rolled, huh? That's what drove everybody so crazy, is because, you know, look at this guy. He's eating with prostitutes and, oh, worse, even tax collectors and stuff like that. And so I don't just want to write off the really important part of that question with the amazing grace of God, okay? Because I want to keep myself, my family, I'm about to be a grandpa, I want to keep my grandkids safe. I definitely want healthy relationships. So with this question about kind of mercy and guidelines, drawing the line, or consequences is the way I would frame it. Mercy and consequences. We draw the line together. We draw the line with everybody who has been harmed, and we draw the line with anybody who participated in the harming. And we come together and we make a plan for healing, okay? Now, what I just outlined takes a long time. And remember when I said it's a squiggly line and it's not the same for anyone? It's messy. And so, unfortunately, more often than not, we just opt for punishment. And I don't know if any of you guys had parents who would, you know, they would sit down and want to talk to you, and you're like, oh man, just ground me, just spank me, just get it over with, you know? and they, no, restorative justice, that restorative mindset does not ignore the need for boundaries and consequences, but it works with everybody buy-in for everybody's boundaries, for everybody to buy into the boundaries. Let me just take that this as an excuse to show you in Rwanda, after people like Philbert confessed in front of the community, which we could get into that part maybe another time here. We'll see another question. It's called Gachacha. Then they were able to go into a camp that I call a reinvent yourself camp. This was several years, I think this was 2016. And these were another group of high school students from the School of Ethics and Global Leadership who were speaking to 200 men and women who had been convicted of genocide. Maybe they didn't swing the machete, but they were part of, you know, betraying the hiding place, or they were collaborating in different ways. And these people were working in the community to build roads, do agriculture projects, make bricks to build schools and stuff. They were basically reinventing themselves. And there was no fence at their camp. There was no wall, and the guards did not even have guns. In fact, I asked a guard one time, one of the first times I visited, because I visited, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 of these camps. And I asked at the beginning, a guard, man, like when it gets dark, and if I'm a prisoner, I would be boom, out of here in that banana plantation and gone, and there's no fence, and you don't even have a gun. And the guard laughed at me. And he says, if you want to go home, we give you 10 days every year to go home for a wedding or a funeral. And I'm like, okay, then do they go home with a guard or something, you know? No, they just get on the bus and go home. Well, then I bet a bunch of them don't come back. No, they all come back. This sounded so unreal to me because I have this mentality of punitive, and in punitive, rarely is it collaborative. And that would be the key word I would put forth to that question, is where do we draw the line? That has got to be a collaborative effort with respecting everybody, giving, and this is the hard one, giving equal weight and value to every single voice. It's one thing to say, we're in a country of equality and everyone is, all are created equal and stuff. But when we live every day, do we give the same value, time, and energy to every single voice? That's hard work. But I believe that's the way that Jesus rolled. I think that's the way of restorative justice. Thanks for that question, Caleb. Did that make sense? And you guys and anybody else in your group, I don't know, Kale and Jennifer too, if there's like, wait a minute, I'm not sure about this, or I didn't quite get that, you're perfectly free to add in, let's converse. But you can also say, that was just so clear, I don't have any further question. No. Thanks.
Next question. How do you forgive
Okay.
when your heart?
Whoa. Sorry. Remember, I get first question. What do you love doing?
Oh, yes. I like photography. I love photography.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool. I think we all feel like we're photographers with these amazing phones, but that finding the good, oh my goodness. I grab pictures out of my phone every morning for my prayer journal. In fact, some of you Milo kids, you're my prayer journal this morning from our thing yesterday when we took a picture. Photographer, love it. Let's go.
How do you forgive when your heart doesn't feel able? And then is it a lie when you say you forgive, but you haven't really moved on?
Excellent question. So here's where I'd like to begin with that one. I'd like to begin with a super basic dictionary definition of forgiveness. Okay? Super basic dictionary definition of forgiveness. I will no longer be angry or bitter, or some would say resentful. Let's go with resentful. I'd no longer be angry or resentful towards somebody for a fault, a mistake, or an offense. Okay? And of course, genocide, we're talking about the worst offense, the most grievous offense. So I will no longer be angry or resentful towards somebody for a fault, a mistake, or an offense. That doesn't mean we're going to be like Maria and Filbert, and that's forgiveness. Maria and Filbert have gone beyond forgiveness, but forgiveness has made their relationship possible. So let's not confuse, because there's some people, as Alexis in the film, the Chicago girl said, Filbert kept apologizing, and she said, that would be helpful for me if the person who did us wrong was sorry. But there'll be times when they won't be sorry, or there'll be times when they're not available, they're gone, or perhaps they've even died. And so the idea of forgiveness starts of getting free from anger and resentment. Okay, so now we start to think about, how do we do that? Okay, and I think that's at the root of your question. And for me, I would spend a little more time on this idea. Okay, no, this is where we'll start. By the way, I don't know if you know, I love this word habitat. I just love it. I love Habitat for Humanity. I just love habitat, okay? And I'm not even a biology guy, although I love birds. I keep threatening to be a bird watcher, but I haven't yet. But this idea of habitat, we need a safe place, which comes back to our last question about boundaries and consequences. And yes, keeping our community, our home, our school safe is a top priority for everyone. It was a top priority for Christ. And so we have to have a habitat of security, which Rwanda did in terms of reducing violence and things. And that's a whole nother conversation of Rwanda's low crime rate and their judicial system and the way that they have restored a habitat of security. But once we have a habitat of security, then people can begin to, this word respect, if you look at it a little deeper, it's kind of like respect. Spect, kind of like spectacles, glasses. Look again. You are worth looking at again. You are worth listening to. So within a habitat of respect, we don't ask you to just jump right into that last part when we talk about respect, empathy, and inclusion. We start with a habitat of respect. You are worth it. You are worth looking to. You are looking at again. You are worth listening to. And then as we do that, we hear the story. You see, I'm afraid it's just so easy to try to fast track to love or fast track to inclusion. And without these basic fundamental steps, it's going to be it's going to be really shaky, sketchy, maybe veneer-like thin. But when we have this habitat of respect and we learn each other's story, man, we start connecting the dots between your story and my story. I loved, you know, as Ronisha was listening to this young lady grew up without a father, she's thinking of her family, her time of growing up without a mother. We connect the dots when we listen to stories, and that's when empathy grows. And now in our habitat of security and respect, we have empathy that's come into the room. And man, when empathy comes in the room, you know it. It is powerful. And that then can lead us to the next part of that. Now, have I wandered of actually where inclusion comes, where we begin to really see what we understand as love? That a choice to love is a choice to connect. But we first need the habitat. We need then to hear, take time, learn each other's stories, and then the inclusion can come. Now, did I get that? Should you read your question again, or did I hijack that question? Or was that close?
I think you did good.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope that makes sense, because that's super important to me. You guys, it's kind of funny. I started out with this respect, empathy, inclusion thing, I don't know how many years ago, just trying to get people something. I'm like, hey, maybe high school kids in the Northwest will remember REI. Anybody ever heard of REI, huh? And I just thought, respect, empathy, inclusion. Well, now REI to me is not the Outback outdoor equipment store. REI to me is respect, empathy, and inclusion. One day I think the store will probably be like, hey, we want to get on board. But anyway, who's next?
Me.
Hi, what do you, okay, now I see your guys, are they in order and stuff? I didn't realize, who's Kale and who's Jennifer?
I'm Kale.
And I'm Jenny.
This is Kayla.
Nice. Jenny? Jenny, what do you love doing?
I love playing volleyball and being with my friends.
Nice, nice, nice. Love it too. Ah, good volleyball game. All right.
So my question for you is, how do you feed positive pathways over the negative ones when it's so easy and even natural to feed the negative pathways?
One more time, please.
How do you feed positive pathways over the negative ones when it's so easy and even natural to feed the negative pathways?
I don't know why I'm missing the first three words of what you're saying. It's so easy to see the negative. So how do we what?
Hey, Carl, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, she was mentioning about how do we steward our positive and negative pathway.
Ooh. That word steward is the one that was throwing me, Jenny. Gotcha, gotcha. But I love that word too. That one is right up there with habitat. Yeah. The short answer for me is to err on the side of beauty and good and generosity. And I think we talked a little bit last night, and many of you I know weren't with us last night, about the brain, as to take that question just a little farther, about what the brain people call a negativity bias. And some of them will go back and say, back in the day when you're dealing with, let's go to Africa and you're dealing with lions, or no, in America, we're dealing with bears or something. If you don't have a high level of attention to the negative, you won't survive. If your level of attention is super high to the positive, they call it the stick and the carrot. If you don't pay attention to the stick, you may not survive. Whack, you're done. If you miss a carrot, you'll probably find another one tomorrow. So that's how some people explain this idea of the negativity bias. But this is where we have the power to change that wiring in our brain. And it'll be something to talk to God about that wiring, because part of me doesn't, I can't see how God created us with a negativity bias. And yet I don't want to be so arrogant or naive as to think that it's just that simple. It's not. and I'm sure that that people who know a lot more about the brain and who know a lot more about life could help me understand that a bit better. But I would say for me right now, this finding the good, when I was at Milo, I started journaling. I mentioned to you guys, this is crazy. I don't know why I get a kick out of. I just remind myself, 22 years of journaling back in '98. Any of you might know Dwight Nelson. He's still going at it there at Andrews, huh? And he did this satellite campaign back in '98. Whatever that name of that satellite evangelistic, Net 98. And he comes out on stage one night with a whole stack of notebooks, and they're his prayer journals. And he showed how he would write scripture. And I think he was doing it like I was kind of showing you the other night in my computer. I do scripture in red and his thoughts in blue. That's all I remember from that thing. But that's what got me started. And so one morning while I was journaling, I don't even remember the Bible text, but I remember thinking, oh man, I just feel like I'm too critical towards Teresa. One of you guys at Milo asked me for some stories about me and Teresa when we were at Milo, and we had so much fun talking about that yesterday. Teresa is one incredible human woman and wife, partner, companion. And I was just journaling saying, you know what? I'm too critical of Teresa. Here's what I'm going to do. Every day when I write in my journal, I'm going to write one thing, at least one thing that I really adored, that I really loved from the day before, that I saw Teresa do, or about her, or the way she interacted with people. Something positive about Teresa every day. And I started doing that as a habit. And sometimes if it was, really good on, I'd put it on a sticky note and put it on the bathroom, mirror or something like that. I mean, they were all good ones. But then the day came when I thought, this has been awesome. Why don't I do that with our kids? And so I started to write in my journal, Mindy, our oldest one. And I wrote, Mindy, I am so ashamed I couldn't think of one thing from the day before positive. That is not on Mindy, because all three of our kids are amazing, and they're amazing people. The problem was I could think about, did you do your homework? Did you, in your room, did you do this? Did you do that? And I went through Mindy, Lisa, Sean, and that day I was so ashamed that I couldn't think of one positive thing. I said, there's no way tomorrow morning is going to get here without me having stuff to write in my prayer journal about that. So that habit of finding the good and writing it down, firing those pathways, making it more of a habit. I started thanking people a couple of years ago for food, because I just in general wanted to be more grateful. And I have so much fun with the guys at the Taco Bell window thinking, hey, how many people have you made happy today? And the guy looks at me, what? Did you want a hot sauce? And I'm like, no, you feed so many people. Do you know how many people you make happy every day? Oh, I guess I do, he says, and then I go across the bridge into New York City, and they charge me $15. And I'm like, $15. Halfway across the bridge, a pathway in my brain fires, and it says, did you thank the toll taker? No, of course I thanked the guy at Taco Bell, but the toll taker was part of the system that robbed me. I was like, that's ridiculous. That's, he has nothing to do with it. He's doing his job. Now I thank all the toll takers. I would put forth to you, start with the easy ones. If I wouldn't have started with thank you at Taco Bell, I would have never had the thought to say thank you to the toll taker. So this idea of stewarding those things, I think in the negative side, I'm going to spend some time writing on that, because I like that challenge. Because my initial thought when I think of stewarding the negative is, how much of the negative am I fighting and resisting? When James would tell me, don't try to get out of this stuff prematurely. It's doing a work in you. You remember that? Consider it pure joy to do that. So stewarding the negative, stewarding the positive. I hope those are a couple of worthwhile thoughts. Love that question. Thanks, Jenny.
Pastor Carl, can you talk a little bit more about the motivation behind Maria's forgiveness? We saw in the chat someone was asking, is this because of her faith in God? Is this because of her own need for sanity and just to deal with it? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Most people in Rwanda are somehow connected to church. And this is wonderful and this is horrible, depending on what lens, what frame we've been talking about reframing. I forgot to grab my little picture frame here. Depending what lens, what frame you're using, it's wonderful or it's terrible. It's wonderful if you think about the opportunity for people to be exposed to the love of God. It's terrible if you think that about a country where 80% of the people were going to church, and that country turned on itself and murdered their neighbors in a proportion that's more than 1 million people. Check this out, okay? 7 million and more than 1 million of them killed. 7 million and probably definitely more than six something, are in, okay, actually 80% of 7 million would be 5,600,000, something like that, right? So that would be like this many of the people are going to church. Now check this out. Seventh-day Adventist, the second largest church in Rwanda. And so Catholic, the largest, I don't know, maybe 4, 3, I don't know how many. Catholic, big. Seventh-day Adventist, 300,000. That's like a digit, huh? In the Pacific Northwest, I don't know if we're over, I don't know, Pastor Lester, if we're over 90,000 now, Alaska, Montana, Washington, Idaho, Oregon, 90,000 maybe. But Rwanda is like a little corner of Washington state, from Spokane to Canada, Grand Coulee, a tiny little corner. That's Rwanda with 300,000 Seventh-day Adventist. So I don't want to get sidetracked on this one. Her motivation, I just wanted to say that, not to trash church, but to get us to reevaluate what's the point of religion. And for me, the point of religion is answered in the same question when Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? The point of religion is to facilitate my connection with God and to facilitate my connection with my neighbor. And if religion becomes anything, I like to put that on a bar graph. Connection with God, way up there, tall tower. Connection with neighbor, way up there, tall tower. Other beliefs and doctrines, little towers moving to the tall towers. But if they become their own big tower, we're in trouble. And so back to her motivation, she would probably say God, I would guess. And yet, if she had an opportunity to talk, like this word restorative justice that Rwanda models big time, many people in Rwanda have never heard that term. They're living it, but they've never heard that term. When she explained things to us, she explained an initial motivation. She wanted to know where her husband and sons were buried. It was initially, she was beginning to connect with him, because it can be, that was an advantage she had that some people don't have when the person who has wronged them is not connectable, reachable. She had begun to connect with him. I don't know if you've ever thought of, many of you I'm sure have. You've been through tough stuff, and you try to reconstruct what happened, why it shouldn't have happened. A lot of things we do in our mind about this, but in Rwanda, they had many missing pieces to the puzzle. And as they started to get more pieces to the puzzle, then they could shut down the kind of cranking what if machine, and they could start dealing with, as Eugenia said in the one video, accepting that it happened. So she would say, okay, this maybe will help, because I should have probably said right at the beginning, we didn't ask her motivation. So I'm only speculating. Here's the best piece though I can take from her in this idea of forgiveness. Eugenia, our translator, she was asking some of the other women in the room about forgiveness. And there was a lot of conversation in Kinyarwanda. Some of it was translated. Maria had stepped out of the room. It was getting towards evening. She jumped back into the room to talk to somebody, and Eugenia said, hey, Maria, wait a minute. And you could tell Maria was in a hurry, but she looks at her and she got this big smile on her face. And Eugenia says, what's forgiveness to you? And Maria looks at her and she says, it's good. And she turns to go. And Eugenia goes, no, wait a minute, Maria. And Maria, tell us more, come on. And this is where it got kind of funny, but beautiful. She points at a regulator. This room is powered by solar energy. And evidently, Maria has become a solar energy technician. And she points at that regulator on the wall for the solar system in there. And she says, without forgiveness, I would have never gone to India. I would have never gone to, I guess, to America. Forgiveness is good. You see, Maria, I think, understood the freedom that forgiveness gives you. And I don't know how she understood that, but I know she models that, and other people see that example of freedom from forgiveness. I love the story where, you know, Peter finally gets up the nerve and says to Jesus, so how many times should we forgive? And 7, you know, everybody's like, whoa, 7, Peter, you're a big spender. And Jesus is like, try 70 times 7. Or what if his answer 70 times 7 is really translated, how bad do you want to be free? How many times do you want to be stuck in the anger and bitterness? You see, it switches the perspective from forgiveness to the person who did wrong to forgiveness to our, as one of our Chicago students said, experience life more fully. And that freedom that comes there. Good question, though. One other quick comment about God. Because one of the Chicago kids said to the people, what about God? and one lady just raises her hand and she stands up and she says, at the beginning, we thought that God didn't like us. She was a Tutsi, marked to be killed. At the beginning, we thought God didn't like us. And it got worse. And we thought, we don't like God. And it got even worse. And we're thinking, there can't be a God. And she stopped there. And to the students' credit, they went on and they said, and today? And you could tell the lady was kind of lost in memories as she was recounting, you know, we thought he forgot us. We thought he didn't like, we don't think there's a God. And this smile comes over her face and she says, we got so lonely. We tried God again, she says. And then another lady said, it is our pain and our grief that has driven us deeper into love. And so if we talk about stewarding the negative, that pain, man, that's an incredible story of stewardship. It's our pain that has driven us deeper into love.
Carl, thank you. That was huge. Let me put one more question here as we kind of wrap up this morning. You're talking right now to a lot of youth and a lot of young people that live on campuses, live with each other, and are trying to solve those crises that we have in our relationships and all the rest. We have about 10 minutes left right now, but would you take us into that idea of let's look at how do we go about living in community in an American culture right now in our schools with each other? We have all kinds of things there, you know, breakups, all those kinds of things, people that do mean things, bully, all that rest of the stuff. How do we navigate practically? What could we do in the next 24 hours? How about that, to start this journey?
When we talked a little bit about this, and thanks, Les, I like that a lot. I love these questions that don't have any simple answers because life's not simple, but yet there are parts of it that are very, well, let me say, there's parts that are kind of simple, but they're hard. Just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. Last night when we talked a little bit about this, we talked about inward reflection, which I still go to that. You know, spending time with ourselves and for us as Christians with God, and looking at what do we really hold dear? What's the most important thing? What will we not leave home without? You know, what is it that's most important to us? Values. And I remember one time I made a list of core values, and I had up there finding the good, you know, and then expressing appreciation, vulnerability. What was that fourth one? I don't remember. And the fifth one was fun, you know? And so the action I would encourage people to, if you want to try something, start some form of appreciation journal, of gratitude journal. This is, I think, one of the ways that we train our mind to find the good, because it's so easy when somebody has wronged us and hurt us to actually pay the price many times over. You know, this might sound ridiculous, but stick with me for a minute. Somebody does something mean and offensive to me, just mean, in front of other people. And man, it hurts so bad. I know sounds kind of crass, but it's like $300 worth of hurt, okay? And then when I go home and I talk to somebody else, we need to process these things in a healthy way, but I may not talk about it in a way of processing it. I simply relive it with somebody else. Not quite as painful at the moment, but it was like $250 worth. You kind of see where I'm going here. I know it's a sort of simple and perhaps crass example, but we experience the pain and re-experience the pain and re-experience the pain. And every time we see that person again, we define them by that pain. So soon they become, that's what this little, do I still have a picture up there? I do. This is supposed to represent, is the danger of one thing thinking. Always just thinking one thing. That teacher, and you fill in the blank. And teachers, I could say that student, and we fill in the blank. We simply unidimensional. One way we define people like that. And that is a rut that we can easily get stuck in, because once we start on the negative, you know, it was fun to say thank you Taco Bell, then thank you toll taker. That was on the positive side. The negative side is when I fire negative pathways, then I find more negative pathways to fire together with them. And I told you that guy's a jerk. You can never trust him. He does this, he does that. So for me, a gratitude journal is one of the most intentional ways I know to counter that kind of one thing thinking, that negativity. The second thing that I would put out there, and I'm not going to say a name because some of you would know this guy and I don't want to embarrass myself more. But there's a guy I used to love reading his stuff, and then he started doing podcasts. And man, in his podcast, he sounded to me so arrogant. And then once that thought was lodged in my brain, the more I listened to him, the more evidence I found of his arrogance, of how stuck on himself he is. And I finally said, there's plenty of other podcasts, I give up. Then I'm listening to another podcast and the guy says, I want to every day, I think he said every day, let's go with that. Every day I want to learn something. And I think he said from my enemy. That seemed a little strong to me, but I took that challenge of learning from somebody I would rather not, okay? And I said, okay, who's somebody that I might be able to learn from that I'd rather not? And I thought of this author, podcaster, who I felt was stuck on himself. And so I happened to be, I remember the place, I was down in Loma Linda, I was going out for a run, and I put a podcast on of this guy. And I had hardly listened to, I don't know how many, a few sentences, and a pathway fired in my brain. Yeah, this guy's stuck on himself. And I said, no, Carl, you want to learn from him. You are running an obstacle course right now. Every time something that says he's stuck on himself comes at you, you're dodging it. You're moving around that. And as I was running this obstacle course, and I would intentionally not fire that thing. I know I heard it and it halfway fired, and I'd say, no, that's not the issue. That's not important. There's something else here that's important. This guy, I've read his work. I can learn from this man. And I had, maybe 20 minutes into the run, I'm like, whoa, that is so cool. Yes, that is true. Oh, I haven't thought of it this way before. And I found myself breaking free from that one thing thinking about that guy. Sometime I'll tell you who he is, Les, because you can help me a little more, I bet. But anyway, those are a few of my thoughts in dealing with people that have been harmful, might even, and you know, honestly, that gets a little dangerous when we just kind of do short conversations here. There are people that are so wounded that we have to be super intentional about self-care as well. And the self-care is in connection with our Father. It's seeing ourselves like with the value that God sees us with, and taking care of ourselves. I will often do kind, thoughtful things for other people that I wouldn't do for myself. Silly little example, but still it was meaningful to me. I come racing in my house, to grab a quick bite to eat, back at Milo again, I remember this, stuck some great lentil soup in the microwave and just sat down with that bowl of soup. And I saw over there placemats. And I said, boy, if I would have had a friend here sharing a bowl of soup, I would have laid down a placemat for him. And I'm going to lay down a placemat for myself. It's a tiny, tiny little thing, but it is because the Father loves me. And it's not just love others as you love yourself, because that can be bad when we don't love ourselves. And so learning to self-care. And one person I've learned a lot about that from, you can find her on the internet, and it's The Power of Self-Compassion, and her name is Kristen Neff. Kristen Neff, YouTube, you just Google self-compassion, probably even without her name, and then you'll say, oh yeah, that's right, Kristen Neff.
Thank you. That's so good. That's so good. I love that placemat analogy.
I could go deeper too.
Oh,
okay,
man.
You said 10 minutes. Sorry, go ahead. Because anyway.
No, I think
I'm glad that made sense, Les. I'm glad that makes sense, because I'm still trying to figure so much of that stuff out. And it just really helps when we're in a group like this talking. It just reinforces those pathways in my brain. It's one of the reasons I love being able to talk about it.
Carl, I was just, as I've just been listening, and I had a thought partway through, as you were just talking about this, the beauty of people around us, and looking for that, and growing that, and building that. And it's definitely been a journey that I felt called into over the past few years, just that, like, that's not my bend. I'm a critical thinker, and I think that way. And I'm not saying that in the pragmatic critical, it's in the negative critical, that's my bend. And I don't like that in me. When I get in that place, it's like, ugh, all right, now I've just dumped this to someone else, but what good did that do them? Like, now they're carrying it, you know, and it's not the therapeutic kind of sense, it's the recreational kind of littering, if you will. And I love that call. And as you were talking, I just had this thought of, what if we imagine that I'm gonna put something out that's kind of theoretical, and I want to make sure it's not misconstrued, but we often look at the salvific process of, like, people who will be saved and not saved and all the rest, but rather than thinking about that and the punitive process of salvation, you know, that God will punish someone, what if we just imagine that the power of God's love is so much that every person we meet, we think they are the kingdom of heaven that we're going to live with the rest of our lives, period, plain and simple. And in that regard, it's the call for us to start that kingdom work now. Like, this is my neighbor, not just for as long as I have to live with them and then someday I'll be free. But I mean, the gritty stories you talk about there are people that did that. They looked at the murderers around them, and they said, I don't see them as murderers. I see them as my kingdom family that we're going to live with here and forever. And why put it off to be free until some future time, you know, when they leave or whatever? Let's just build it now. Let's do it now. Let's go through that work.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy thing, but it's powerful. But part of that reframing is just the idea that these aren't good and bad people. These are God's children.
No.
We are all God's children, and we're complex.
You know, if I had a whiteboard here right now, and I had, well, let's go ahead and bring back a picture here of Filbert. And let's say that, you know, not let's say, the reality is Filbert did a lot of terrible things. And if every terrible thing he did was a swipe of an eraser over him, I could never erase the full image of God in Filbert. I define him by negative stuff, and I keep swiping and swiping, but the image of God is there. And I was able to come to a place where I could say to myself, I would love to go for a walk with Filbert one day. I don't know if that's going to happen. In fact, if you guys want to learn a little more of this story, Netflix, I don't know if any of you are Morgan Freeman fans. We're going off in a left field here for a moment, but Morgan Freeman does a really powerful series on Netflix called The Story of Us. It's, I think, 6 or 8 episodes. I think 6 episodes, The Story of Us. Each episode, powerful, powerful material in it. And episode number 2, about 30 minutes in, he's in Rwanda. Wow. And Morgan Freeman has a conversation with President Kagame, and then he goes to the Kigali Genocide Memorial, and he has a conversation with Maria and Filbert. I was so pumped when I saw that. I'm like, he got to meet Maria and Filbert. And then the other voice in my head says, yeah, Maria and Filbert got to meet Morgan Freeman, which probably didn't mean much to them, but because I don't think they have a TV. But anyway, the point is that this idea, where is the point? Where was I going? I was just saying you could learn more about Maria and Filbert's story, but in that short little interview with Morgan Freeman too, while I was happy for more people to see the story, they only had so much time, and body language is really interesting. If you watch that video, some of Maria's body language didn't look comfortable to me. And I'm not critiquing anybody here, but I'm just saying that often as we're looking at these stories, these are really tough stories for people to tell, tough experiences to go through. And it's easy to jump to a conclusion, particularly with people who have perpetrated, people who have done harm, to jump to negative conclusions from their body language, from other things, that we really should be, like Patricia said here in the video, just listen. I just need to be here. I need to be present and listen. And so, but I do love that idea of, and I'm no master at this, Les, but that idea that the image of God is in everybody, and that no matter what they've done or how I define them by negative things, the image of God is still. Have you ever thought, I know probably a lot of us have talked a lot about Paul and stuff, and you know, we're amazed at Saul who became Paul. But for me, coming from a world of genocide, have you ever thought about somebody who Saul killed, the second coming, they're in heaven, and they see Saul coming down the street. Before Saul killed them, he killed their mother. He arrested their uncle. All of these things, they could only see that. And then Saul had this incredible experience. He had a heart that was passionate, and it was passionate for law and the legal system of the church. And then Saul got this heart that was passionate for the grace of God. So yeah, the idea, I know he's an extreme example, but I love those two. They give me hope that because I got to change. Coming back to what you said, I got to have this heart like Christ that doesn't see people like initially we would see them and judge them. And I think those are the people that Jesus was talking about. You know, I was always kind of confused when, you know, the Matthew, is it 25, I think, where the sheep and the goats, and he's like, you know, I was in prison, you visited me. You know, I was hungry, you fed me. I was sick, you came to visit. And the people are like, really? When did that happen? You know, and it's because their mind was so in tune with empathy, with a love that connects, that they're like, that was you? Really? I love that.
Pastor Carl, I feel like it brings it back to, I think you said it was Enoch that said it's just those little choices, those little
Yes.
actions, those small
Yes.
steps that we can all take to do good. And you said last night that good is just God with an extra O, and each step that we're able to take in doing something good is a step, a snapshot of God, which I think is such a cool opportunity. And you had an amazing calling to be a part of this whole experience in Rwanda, which is tragic and beautiful at the same time when you watch the whole journey. And each one of the students that are here with us, or they get to watch this later, have the opportunity to be the hands and feet of Christ in their own way and with their own gifting. And God has such an incredible plan for each of them. And it might not look like what your journey does, but those little steps that we can each take, whether that's
Absolutely.
a step toward forgiveness or a step towards social justice, like you've mentioned many times, if it's a step towards leadership in the church, in their school, in their home even, every little step that we can take towards good, every pathway we can rewire to see the good, to remove just that one thing we see in someone and step back and take away what their action may be and see them as God sees them, see them for their true worth versus what we've kind of cornered them into. Whatever that step, that little action we can take right now is going to lead us towards whatever that calling is of God for each of our lives. And I think it's important for us to, if you're willing, to pray to open your heart to whatever that calling is. I know for me, I have to remind myself sometimes not to plan for myself, but to ask God for his plan and to put that in the forefront, because I know it's so much better than what I have in mind for myself. And when I take his plan for me, I'm able to redirect my course and experience so much more good and reprogram those pathways so much more easily. There's just so much good to be had, and I'm excited to see what that plays out in for each of you here. You guys have some incredible purpose in God's plan.
I hope that it has triggered some. I mean, you hear this verse, we're fearfully and wonderfully made, but man, we have no clue just how amazing we are. If you do get a chance, little fun TED Talk, if you just go on YouTube and you type in fire to rewire, and you'll see a guy talking about the brain. You'll see actual imagery of the brain and synapses. And he talks about how new pathways are formed and old pathways actually recede. I know that there's this thing that everything we've ever seen and known, experienced is stored in our brain, but accessing it isn't always, it doesn't always happen. But studying the science alongside of our Creator and what his intention is for us, we can then see how that science and that intention of connection, no greater love is anybody than they lay down their life for somebody else. How do you get that brain pathway that you do that? People think, oh, he's just a nice guy, he's just generous. No, it's a series of choices. And I think we can, as we take off from here, because honestly, I don't want to quit. Usually if it was a Bible conference, we'd still be able to talk, and then we'd see each other again at a different place. And I would love to hear more right now of what's going on in the mind of so many of you students right now, but we're somewhat limited with this, but I don't want to focus on the limit. We have potential to keep unpacking what the tiny steps look like, what the science is, and then what that pathway, our first day we were talking about, Peter's like, I don't know where you're going, and I don't know the road. And Jesus goes, I'm the road. We have that opportunity, all of us, to get on that road, that thing. The kingdom of God's here now. And I'm just really grateful for the invitation to come and share some stories, some friends, old and new, with you. And I look forward to continued conversations, whether it's online, virtual, or one day face-to-face. Thank you. And thank you to Les and your whole team that's working for the kingdom of God is here now.
Thank you so much, Carl. Would you pray for us as we close, and then invite for those who would like to stay by and have some, should we call it the foyer talk today, since it's church?
Cool.
Yeah, we can stay by, and I know there's still a number of questions that people have been sharing, so we can jump into those. So thank you, Carl.
Absolutely, you bet. Let's pray. Father, we just love stopping and saying Father, or sometimes Papa. We are just, our hearts, well, I think many of us, I don't want to speak for everybody, I know my heart is filled with gratitude. As we look at these stories out of some of the most horrific situations, we still see your Spirit. No matter some of the worst choices we make, we can never fully erase your image. We are made in your image with all kinds of potential. You've got all kinds of plans, and yet you leave it free choice for us. That's scary at times. And sometimes I wish you'd take the choice away and just, you just start feeling like some of the stuff Paul was saying, oh man, what I don't want to do, I do, and what I want to do, I'm not doing and stuff. But in all of that struggle, you were there patiently right next to us saying, I love you, I got you. I love you, I got you. I adore you, I've got you. We're not going anywhere. I've got everything you need for every situation. I put care packages along the road for us. So Father, we just really want to thank you for the way you shepherd us and you love us, you guide us, and you give us chances like this with the technology and everything else. Thanks for Sabbath, every week to pause. That's just so crucial and so fun. Father, I too pray for the people who right now are maybe not feeling hearts full of gratitude because of the situations we're in, or things we have no idea that they're going through. But you know it. And I pray that they will not only hear and feel, sense your love, whether it is through music or beauty or just a good meal, but I pray that you'll help us to be able to reach out and be that channel that of love to those who are not feeling that love right now. I remember one of my friends, after surviving and losing so many families, spending just dark days in his room, not wanting to go anywhere because he felt like nobody was there for him. And somehow, God, you got through to him, and you got him to go out and be that person to somebody else. The person he was not having, he could be for somebody else. That's my prayer, and I think that's the prayer of a lot of the people who are here today. So guide us to be that person, to be that love, to be you with skin on. We pray in Jesus' name with a lot of confidence and excitement. Amen.